All right, this video is titled The Difference Between Being Afraid and Annoying. So, referring to anime characters that I guess are timid or whatever, and sometimes they're annoying as hell because they're too timid. I'm not too sure, but let's go ahead and check it out. Let's go.
Fear is a pretty universal experience, so it's no shock that
Everybody
writers
fears
use
it.
it constantly to explore characters. And while some of the most iconic characters in media are cowards, it's not always easy to do it well. Welcome to a running series called Exploring Fearin. My name is Pei,
Okay.
and today we're exploring the archetype of a coward. Character arcs are a fundamental part of storytelling, and fear has been used across all forms of media. Look at horror as a genre, or how often villains are terrifying. Generally, heroes face things without hesitation. But what happens when you place a coward among these heroes as a supporting character? It can contextualize everything and through
really can.
contrast highlight the brave actions around them. Or, and this tends to be true too, it can be really annoying. So today we're going to be looking at primarily three different characters in anime that fall under this archetype of the coward. Stark from Frieren, Usopp from One Piece, and Zenitsu from Demon Slayer. This video was originally created with the intention of comparing Stark and Zenitsu, but in writing the video I realized that Usopp is an interesting sequitur between the two. That being said, a couple asterisks, we're going to be talking just about the anime adaptations of Frieren and Demon Slayer. We're not going to be talking about the manga. And for Usopp, we're primarily going to be focusing on the first couple arcs through Arlong Park. I haven't watched past the first 150 episodes of One Piece, so I probably shouldn't talk about Usopp as a general character rather than his introduction. Okay, qualifiers out of the way, let's jump in. One of the best things you can do when creating a relatable character who's a coward is give them fears that are reasonable. Stories often take place in extreme circumstance, with lives and the world on the line. Zenitsu and Stark are facing terrifying monsters, and Usopp is essentially surrounded by gods capable of destroying buildings with single swipes. These characters being afraid makes sense. And while this helps, it doesn't mean that they're well-written characters. I'm specifically talking about Zenitsu here. I'll explain my criticism in more detail as the video goes on, but I've constantly seen people defending Zenitsu's poor character writing under the realm of realism. And while I do believe at first that Zenitsu's fears are reasonable, I argue that he's a poor example of the coward archetype that could have been so much more. There's this really cool clip from an interview with Gabe Newell, the famous game developer responsible for the Half-Life series. He argues fun is not realism but reinforcement.
Somebody say that's not realistic, and you're like, okay, explain to me why that's interesting, because in the real world I have to write up lists of stuff I have to go to the grocery store to buy, and I've never thought to myself that realism is fun. I go play games to have fun, and so we had to come up with some notion of what fun was. We knew it was an ad hoc definition, and it was the degrees to which the game recognizes and responded to the player's choices and actions.
I agree a lot with parts of this sentiment. Media is made with a purpose in mind, and the pursuit of realism can get in the way of that goal. I'd also argue that realism can serve the purpose. It mostly depends on how it's done.
100%, exactly. It's how it's done, right? As Gabe said in his example, right? Writing up a grocery list, obviously not that fun. Going to the grocery store, that's where the fun begins. Are you going to go straight to the right aisle and grab everything you want? Or are you going to go for a little bit of sightseeing? Maybe check out the technology aisle. Oh, maybe they got a new TV, or maybe there's some free samples, right? The adventure, it doesn't lie with the mission itself. It's the things you do around the main objective of whatever your mission is, whether it's go to the grocery store or go wash your car. It's the things in between that create the substance that is the enjoyment of real life. Also, the same can be said for inside video games.
While Gabe Newell was talking about video games, today we're talking about shows, and more specifically, characters in shows.
Same thing in the shows
fear
as
could
well.
positively impact the character writing, in the end it just ends up getting in the way. And I don't feel that way about Stark or Usopp. So let's look at a couple reasons why this archetype of the coward doesn't work as well in Demon Slayer as the other two shows. Starting first with facing fear. A quick reminder, if you enjoy these videos or find yourself back here after watching a previous one, consider subscribing. Adversity and conflict is the basis of a lot of storytelling. Characters struggling and facing challenges are central to character growth. So when characters face their fear, it can be incredibly endearing. And the first difference between a well and poorly written coward is the way they explore the impacts of fear, not the fear itself. Being afraid is one thing, but the way the character responds ultimately determines how the audience is going to perceive them.
They'll either be brave or they'll be cowards, yes, but the difference is no. The real issue is the fear. What are you going to do with this fear?
Stark and Usopp face their fears despite them. Zenitsu is never
That's big.
proactive, often cornered before he takes any sort of response. There's one exception to that, but we'll get to that later. Usopp and Stark's heroism is expanded on, not diminished because of their fear. They're acting against their overwhelming instinct because they need to help or contribute. Zenitsu's big badass moments never seem to contribute to any confidence, but they also don't seem to come with any consequence. There's one moment where Zenitsu acts heroically without that crutch of being unconscious. In Season 1, Episode 12, Zenitsu faces his fear, protecting Tanjiro's box because he's his friend and it's important to Tanjiro. We'll talk about how important this scene is for my argument later when we come back to growth. But outside of that scene, Zenitsu consistently avoids facing his fears, which is especially frustrating given how powerful he is. Which leads to the next point, power. If you were to create a Venn diagram between Stark, Zenitsu, and Usopp, at the center would be the fact that they're cowards. But Zenitsu and Stark share another trait. They're incredibly powerful in universe. And in both cases, this leads to really cool moments where they get to show up against a powerful opponent. And while being strong isn't inherently a bad thing, Usopp's lack of power is part of what makes his character so interesting. He finds ways to contribute in this grand adventure, despite not having as powerful of a skill set as his surrounding allies. So while Usopp gets his shiny moments, it's never coming from a place of power, but ingenuity. But big shiny moments from power are incredibly fun. That's why a lot of other characters in One Piece
a lot of people want to be the main character.
Zenitsu's power in Demon Slayer is incredibly frustrating. Not only because he should be continuously building confidence through the series as he fights stronger and stronger opponents, but also because I think the solution to his fear and how he consistently fights feels like a huge cop-out, especially with the way it's explored. Which leads to our third point, solution and consequence. For a character to be incredibly powerful and a huge coward, there needs to be some sort of circumstance and acknowledgement. Because someone who's incredibly powerful shouldn't stay afraid of things for very long. Alright, this is the point where we're going to start really getting into spoilers for both Frieren and Demon Slayer. We're going to be covering the first season of Frieren and Demon Slayer through the Hashira training arc. Something that makes Usopp and Stark really interesting characters is not only are their fears justified, but they adjust as the story goes on. Their fears are based off of the experiences they continue to have. When Stark finally overcomes the dragon, he doesn't simply just transform into someone that's no longer afraid, he just gains some level of confidence. And later, his reluctance to fight the demons doesn't undermine that growth, because when push comes to shove, he doesn't hesitate. We're getting a little bit too much into the growth category, which I want to talk about later, so instead we're going to focus right now on how Zenitsu's character doesn't have proper solutions and consequences. Having unconsciousness be the solution to Zenitsu's fear is a bit of an anime answer. That being said, most audiences, me included, constantly deal with weird answers and solutions to problems as long as they're properly set up. So my issue doesn't actually lie in the fact that Zenitsu's solution is that he's unconscious. It just feels like there should be some consequence or play around that idea. If power in stories is a byproduct of some shortcut, it needs to come with some trade-off. If Zenitsu can't overcome his fear and has to rely on his unconsciousness to fight, there should be trade-offs. There's a video from a YouTuber named Captain Mac that goes into potential answers to this feeling. For example, paraphrasing Captain Mac, if Zenitsu when he was unconscious wasn't capable of differentiating between ally and foe, that would create a consequence for that Deus Ex Machina. It would feel less like a cop-out. Or if Zenitsu had some sort of internal struggle where he was desperate to fight but couldn't get himself to pass out, that could have been a great moment for character growth where Zenitsu would learn that he couldn't rely on passing out to face his fears. There was also little to no explanation why Zenitsu could pass out and still fight, or why he became more conscious throughout the series while in that passed out state. There's a difference between implying things and a story requiring headcanon for anything to make sense. They could have just had a training arc where Zenitsu realized by closing his eyes and only listening, because that's his whole thing, he has great hearing, that he's capable of fighting without facing his fears. Literally any answer and consequence would be better than none. Stark's powerful but lacks self-confidence. As he takes on more enemies, he gains confidence and starts to lose that fear. In one season, we see more character growth from Stark than I feel like Zenitsu has gone through in the entire series so far. But even if we did see sudden change in Zenitsu, I think it would be incredibly undeserved because they'd have to explain the entirety of why he changed suddenly in the new season. No matter how justified the answer is, they're going to be introducing these ideas after he's already made some sort of change. Maybe it'll be done really well and they'll explore Zenitsu in a satisfying way by the end of the story. But more than likely, I won't be satisfied with any change that didn't feel set up over a long period of time, because while human growth comes in tipping points, that requires lots of buildup. Which leads to the fifth point, just walk away. I don't understand why Zenitsu is still a demon slayer if he's so afraid and not growing at all. Usopp is desperate to become a hero who goes on adventures and wants to overcome his fear. Stark keeps finding himself in situations where he can't leave people behind and needs to protect them. But why is Zenitsu still a demon slayer? If he's that afraid, just step away or find other ways to help. And if he can't do that, explain why he can't do that. If Zenitsu's fear is as serious as it
explain
seems
it.
to be, it
Give
should
us
be explored
reasons.
in the story. Because facing your fears is actually a very admirable trait. Sticking to something that's really
100%.
hard, despite your inclination not to, just to help people is actually very likable.
That's
Part of the reason
admirable,
I know
man.
that is because I love Usopp and Stark for those reasons. It's almost a more pure representation of heroism. In thinking about this, I don't even actually want Zenitsu to have quit being a demon slayer. I just wish the story had given us more of a reason why he stuck with it, which leads to the last and I think most important part of this all, which is character growth. Even in the small
That's
chunk of One
always
Piece I
important.
got to see, I felt like Usopp went through a lot of growth, and very importantly, not at a pace that felt unrealistic. It wasn't
Mhm.
sudden and drastic. Big moments where he was brave were built up to, stakes were set. And along that line, Stark
He
is an
rose to the
outstanding character that
challenge. Yeah.
faces his fears consistently. He doesn't magically change overnight. He
Okay.
practices to counteract his fear and learns to trust those around him. He
That's
struggles
big.
to take those leaps of faith that are necessary to face your fears until people are in danger and he feels obligated to try to help. Stark
Okay.
and Usopp's growth often comes
That's
from
pretty big.
proactive action, and they're so far from static characters. The closest thing we see to Zenitsu growing in the story is when he fights to save Tanjiro's box. Captain Mac's video points this out. It's a terrible sign when the scene that indicated the most growth in a character was in the first season and then they abandoned it completely. One
Yes.
of my friends a
That is
little while
sad.
back retweeted this thing. It was a
It's
question
like, bro, you peaked in season one? What?
asking what the best character design and worst executed character was. And to no shock, he retweeted Zenitsu. Part of the reason why I found this character so disappointing is because it felt like it had so much promise. I didn't realize I was a sucker for these archetypal cowards that are forced to face their fears. I enjoy
You're
Usopp and
faced to
I
grow up.
love Stark. They navigate their fears in a way that's so compelling, especially given the fact that they're supporting characters that are sometimes overshadowed. Stark has so many magnificent moments, like facing the dragon for the first time, or when he faces the demon that can emulate his master's technique. He was so afraid of
Whoa.
Aizen, so to see
That's
someone
powerful.
literally emulating that and then to overcome it, to realize that she just doesn't hit as hard, it's such a fantastic scene. The archetype of the coward has been emulated time and time again and resulted in some of the best moments in television. It's hard to do consistently well, but when a writer does a good job, it's just so easy for me to love those characters. Thanks for watching. I'll be
That
back
was a
next
great
time.
video. Exploring Furin. Okay, well, that was cool. Pay talks anime. That was a good video. Yeah, it is actually kind of sad to hear that, there isn't that big of a development for Zenitsu. That's actually pretty surprising. I've seen Demon Slayer season one through three. I haven't watched the latest one. I guess would be season four. I haven't seen it. I did see the manga though, so I do know how it ends. And it's sad to hear that, a character that's been around since the very beginning. I feel like if they're gonna be throughout the whole series, they have to have some type of important send off. You can't just go through all these seasons and not have any development. Like that's not a good character. That's not a good life. That's not a good way of. I guess the best way I could say it, it's pretty disappointing. Like, how can you be a fan of this character, but your character doesn't do anything?
But they
and,
also
and,
don't seem
and like they peak in the first season. But it is cool to hear about these other characters that do show that they have more to offer. I know Usopp as a character, he proved himself like that he wasn't strong, so he was like, yeah, I can build stuff for the ship. And then he got replaced doing that, and then he talked back to Luffy, right? So Usopp's development from what I've seen through One Piece, I think is absolutely amazing. And it's good that he has a bunch of development. So this other guy, the red guy, I don't remember his name, but the red guy, honestly, even for a side character, he seems like he's pretty fleshed out. He has a lot of good looking scenes. So, it's an interesting it's definitely an interesting archetype, being scared and being afraid, right? Everybody has fear, everybody has doubt, everybody has anxiety, right? We all have these things, but it's what we do to get over it or get past it. Or for some people, just sit back and let it consume them. It it varies and it has so many different results. So to see characters that also, go through these issues, it's of course it's empowering to see them rise to the occasion. More characters should definitely do that to inspire more people to do said thing. But yeah, that's the video. That's the reaction. Hope you guys enjoyed. Like if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you're new, join the Discord link down below and drop videos you want me to check out, and I'll check them out when I get to. Anyways, I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye bye.